you talking?
I'm going to present my entire screen because I'm a monster.
Oh boy. Can I message you somewhere?
Oh yes, please do.
And now I have to learn how to use PowerPoint.
How did you make it?
View.
Start from
The
the
first 5
View.
slides are how to start writing a PowerPoint, and then you
View.
get into print modeling.
Or bottom right.
There we go.
Or that.
Excellent. I don't actually use PowerPoint to present. I just make.
Can I get you to hit the hide link there, so I don't have to look at meet.google.com or sharing your screen? Thank you.
Happy?
Yes, you make me very happy.
All right. We know all that information. Let's move on. So.
Oh, he didn't have to do that. We're AVing. Don't mind us. Keep going.
Things we're going to talk about today. Sort of explain what a threat model actually looks like, the pieces and parts you're going to expect to have, why we're here, like why you actually want to do threat modeling. What we need to pull in the room, the tools you can use, diagrams, what the review process looks like, and I've got the MS TMT there. That's Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool. That is not a tool I'm going to advocate for you using. I'm not getting paid to say that. It's just the tool I've had the most success with, so your mileage may vary.
It's not the Ninja Turtles?
Correct.
Okay.
Do you have other options other than the Microsoft one?
Other options, there's Threat Dragon, and then there's also doing it the old-fashioned way with paper, pen, and Excel, but
A whiteboard.
makes a lot of things easy. Yeah, so whiteboard, you analog.
So Zoom has a Zoom, and I think even Teams, they have a whiteboard share that you could use when you're doing that. It's very clunky. It's a lot like using MS Paint, but it can get the job done.
Clunky, or you can just use the package tool from Microsoft for threat modeling.
If anybody ever uses Skype at all, there's also a whiteboard there.
Great.
We've used Skype since like middle school.
Yeah, no, we haven't either, but the fucking state government does.
Google has a whiteboard too.
So, this is a ColaSec presentation. I encourage you to interrupt me. I don't know if you've noticed, but interruption is a frequent occurrence here at ColaSec.
I'm actually here just to interrupt him.
Exclusively for that.
That's not what I heard.
So let's get into it.
I need goats.
So one of the first places I'm going to point you is the Showstack and Associates. That's from Adam Showstack. Literally wrote the book on threat modeling. I haven't bothered to read it. Tim bothered to read the first chapter and then gave up and said, "Okay, we're going to get started."
That's literally what it's. Also, I was going through it for another research project, and it's like part 1. So I actually found my bookmark, by the way. Hold on. Like, it was from 2016. It was like, holy crap. After 109 pages, I was ready to threat model.
I think I might have made it 45 seconds into the presentation before Tim derailed us. Excellent.
Sweet.
Hey, you referenced me, so I had to pipe up. I don't know what you want from me.
This was not planned. We don't have a script here. We're just really fucking predictable.
Also, threat modeling is very near and dear to my heart, so expect this to be a regular occurrence.
Excellent. So Showstack's bent on it is to start from those 4 basic questions on the right there. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? As a methodology, I don't have a problem with that. I prefer a little bit more structure because that's sort of open-ended and it lead you to wandering off from the original task you had at hand. So what I've found success with is building that list of artifacts there on the left. So an inventory of actors and components. The inventory is sort of bread and butter of security. If you don't have inventory, you can't protect it. Diagrams are a super powerful tool for explaining how things are connected, which resources use which assets within your environment, what actors, so people, are actually interacting with the system as intended, and who can abuse the system. Like, that if you enumerate all of the actors you expect to have, you can start to get a feel for who might abuse the system and how they might go about abusing it. The bug issue and threat list is a thing that you sort of intuit should emerge from those questions on the right. I prefer to explicitly call that out as a thing we expect to produce here. As I build a threat model for a system, I want to start to build a running punch list of things I want to address. Some of those things I'm going to address directly. I'm going to actually make system changes to address those threat vectors. Some of those things I'm going to go, nah. Of the 4,000 things I have to worry about, I'm not going to touch that one today. But I like to have it on the list, so I know eventually I considered it, and one day I went, eh. And the last thing is a contact list. It's very, very easy over the course of time for this information for the information to get disjointed from the people that actually provided it, and to lose the connections between who helped you build a particular model and the actual data in the system. And ultimately, this data, you can build a threat model based on a design document for a system. I've found much more success in just building it based on interview questions and talking to people in real time, because design documents are a static artifact that get thrown on a shelf and never touched after a system gets built. And so 18 months into the life of a product, that design document may not look anything like the application as running on a system. And having a list of contacts of the people who actually put the damn thing together is super helpful. Even if they aren't here anymore, it can at least go and give you a name to start asking, what about Gary? Do we know anything about Gary? Where did he put his documents? Do we know anything about? It can give you breadcrumbs.
Wouldn't it by nature be a kind of a changing document as, you know, new technology comes into whatever the project is? Wouldn't that?
Absolutely. So there is a concept in the development universe for documentation as a component of the system, and it literally lives alongside source code. So it lives in Git or whatever versioning system you use. And as you're building the system, you're documenting the API or whatever in source code or alongside source code. And so when you publish your application and push it onto a server, you update the readmes then and everything that the actual end users use to interact with the system. This, to me, needs to follow that same life cycle and methodology. Another core tenet in this is that the joke about the library, right? That belongs in a museum. All of this data you can put on a shelf and let it age and get out of date just like the original design document. This really needs to not be that. As you build a threat model, that needs to be a living model that you update continually over the life cycle of a platform, and you reference back to. One thing that I have found tremendous success with is as we start building diagrams, building narratives about how systems are put together and interact with different teams, we find things that we didn't know originally when we started. There's some server involved that we weren't aware of. There's some worker agent on a system somewhere that we weren't aware of that's critical to the operation of the whole application. Developer wasn't aware it existed, so it didn't make it into the original threat model. This stuff has to be in a place where it can be easily updated by many parties. I would not advocate that you build a threat model and you maintain it on your system. It needs to be in a museum, in a library, in something that people can go and touch and interact with, and not open to the people that maintain your system. So your server engineers, your network engineers, your developers, your security administrators, all of these folks need to have access to the threat models. Is that sort of where you were going with that, Jeff?
Yeah. And, you know, as a product develops, it's going to change over time, right? So you have your initial design documents, but you have design documents for update version 2 that added single sign-on. That's a different threat than, you know, hosting your own authentication, things like that.
Yep. Cool. So why do we create threat models? This is probably the funniest thing in my presentation.
Is that a Sharknado?
Absolutely.
He
So
loves that movie. I don't get it.
no, I don't love that movie. I love all 7 of those movies.
Yes.
If you haven't watched it, the first one is, it's not going to get better. So if you're into it, making popcorn and sort of making fun with it of the movie while you watch it, excellent. Anyhow, so as you're talking to folks within an organization about a given system, if you ask a server engineer what's involved in a given application, they're going to give you one answer. If you ask a database administrator, they're going to give you another. If you ask a developer, they're going to give you another answer. None of those answers are correct. They're all pieces of the puzzle, and you have to pull everybody's answer or everybody's information together to build a comprehensive picture of the whole thing that you're trying to secure. The other piece of this is every application is different. It's its own animal and has its own idiosyncrasies. So from a security standpoint, there isn't a silver bullet solution that a project manager is going to walk into your office at some point in your career and go, what are the security requirements of this application? I don't know. What does the application look like? Like, I can't give you a list. I can't conjure a list out of air. And if I did, I would just slide 853 across the desk. Do you want all 700 pages of that? Because, without any other information, that's what I'm going to give you. And that's not what they want anyway. So this threat modeling process is a mechanism to go through the design systematically, methodically, and distill out the security requirements for each piece of the system and actually develop actionable things. Like, I need two-factor authentication here, and I need encryption here, I need logging here, and then we've got a reasonable assurance that we've got security around this system. So, in addition to pulling everybody into the room, building one comprehensive picture of the way the application is put together, all of the pieces involved in the system, that process is going to give folks insight into one another's silos. If you're in a very siloed organization, that allows you to socialize in a way that you don't really get an opportunity to in other venues. If you're not in a socialized venue, maybe this has less value. I've just found more siloed environments than not, and this has been tremendously powerful in terms of breaking down barriers. And it gives folks an opportunity to ask questions that they, technical people to technical people, just ask a question like, are we actually doing that? I thought that I've had a security engineer ask, wait, all of the code, it gets deployed from that one server onto all of our other servers? Yeah, you compromise that, you can compromise all the other servers. That's how it works.
Just remember this is not going to be a 1 hour meeting.
Well, we'll come to that. Maybe in the wrong order in the slides, but hey, we'll come to that. So the other thing about threat models is that the threats you have to consider are heavily influenced by the industry you're in. Some research is going to be required here. There is no flat answer, or there is no index that I've found that you can go to and I'm in this vertical, what threats do I have to consider? You just have to do some research and keep it in the back of your mind while you're doing this threat modeling process. Maybe as I mature in the process, I'm going to build my own index for the Premise Health, the company I'm with now. I've got these threats I need to put top of list because it's the biggest concern as a healthcare company. The other thing that I would encourage you to keep in mind is that system failure is a threat, and if you find a single point of failure at some point in your process, you can point that out to a security person and go, hey, if the power goes out here, the whole damn thing falls apart. Maybe we should fix that, maybe we don't. It's not a hacker, it's not someone trying to steal our data, but if that piece fails and the whole application goes offline, availability is 1/3 of the CIA triad that we all harp on.
You threw the keyword in there, I was going to
Yeah.
try that. So in that same respect, you would point out data integrity as well, anywhere that you would find where there's
Absolutely.
not checking or redundancy or whatever
Yep.
of data or processes.
Yep. And
Staff? You would point out staff too, right?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Next.
So, if you haven't seen Leon the Professional, it's a fantastic movie. It's that where that gif of Gary Oldman screaming everyone is. I think you need everyone in the room on this. I would not advocate for trying to get everyone in the room on your first outing. This is the kind of thing that can grow organically. I think as a bare minimum, you need the database administrators, infrastructure support, so your server guys and your developers in the room. to talk intelligently about the way the application's put together. Longer term, if you've got identity and access management folks, if you've got compliance folks, if you've got a privacy advocate in the organization, all of those folks will be interested in the way data moves through the system and unintended consequences of the application functioning. So as an example there, if you've got an application that is a employee can go and query to see if this user's in another system, it's going to interface with a third party. Well, you're exposing that person's identity to that third party by virtue of searching in their system. Is this person there? They might not have had any idea that that person was there, and depending on what space you're in, if you're in an oncology clinic and now you're interfacing with that third party, now I know that that person is associated with an oncology clinic for some reason. That's a privacy issue that isn't going to get brought up in any other forum, but maybe that's something we need to consider. Maybe that needs to be covered in the legal agreement between you and the other party or whatever. And that's the sort of thing you can dig out with the threat modeling process. Were you going to bring something else in? Or?
I had a question. So,
But please. I could see it in your eyes.
Well, I was tinkering with audio, so you may have already covered this. But where do you? So you're kind of talking about a specific model for a specific application at the enterprise level. Where do you? I say the enterprise level. Where do you start? Is it at the application level, or do you build out from there? Do you do a bigger one and then zoom in?
So I am an application security engineer, and my presentation is biased toward threat modeling for applications. I don't see any reason that you couldn't start from the enterprise level and do super high level, enumerate all of your assets, the applications you've got that are customer facing, the applications you've got that are internal facing, the customer bases that you have, the third parties that you're interfacing with.
Do you get into crown jewels? You talking about that?
I haven't. I don't make a big deal of crown jewels in this presentation, but I'm sure Tim will.
Okay.
But that's absolutely something, an internal asset that you should enumerate when you're enumerating all the components in your threat model. And the only caution I would have in trying to do a threat model for an entire organization like that is that things can get super complicated really quickly if you're trying to build a data model and talk about how all of those things interact. Because it's a traveling salesman problem, right? If I've got 400 pieces on the board and I'm trying to diagram out all of the connections between them, I've drawn a bowl of noodles on the screen, and it can get really difficult to pull anything of value out of it. I think it's easier if you cut the organization into chunks as much as it makes sense to, and then approach it from that angle. I'm coming at this from the bottom up. Like, I'm coming at this from the super granular side. Look at this application. Let's dig into that and see what's there. But I don't know, maybe I come back and get this presentation in another 18 months and I'm like, no, that was stupid. I never should have done it that way.
I have been summoned. So I'd like to just say I love gold. Corey, I actually want to know more what you're getting at, specifically, because I have just found. So what I found was I was doing threat modeling from an application security standpoint. I took that once I got promoted over the security engineers. I found it actually very useful for some of the design stuff, for a lot of security engineering stuff, and even before I even go to the next part, if you want to hear what you're kind of getting at there.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of a question of where do you start, and the answer would be at the beginning, right? And so I don't know if there is an official place to start, and so it kind of depends upon your undertaking, right? So as Adam was talking about, what staff do you put in the room? If you're talking about a specific application, then great, all of those things make sense. If you're talking about an organization at whole, do you start with executives? Do you put them in the room and talk about threat modeling?
So, and that, I think, and this is an intuitive assumption on my part, I think it makes more sense to start small and show wins, because it's easy to get a smaller group of people, and it's a hell of a lot easier to get a developer, a server engineer, and a DBA in the room and the DVA is going to be the prickly one, if my experience is any indication. But it's a hell of a lot easier to get those 3 actors in a room with a manager or 2 than it is to get your CFO in the room to talk about threat modeling, because they're going to want to know what the hell you're on about and why it's worth his time.
Well,
Without
Corey,
you're not going to be able to show that.
Yeah.
so, well, Corey, yes. So one of the things we've had to really dive into is the cloud. And Adam, I left him with this, and then I also, well, to Adam's credit, I was like prepared to take on the cloud and the new cloud environment we had, and Adam was like, "I got this," and I was like, "All right, it's all yours." But like a cloud environment, when you're, and we experience this with acquisitions, where it's like, okay, where do we start? So with a cloud environment, which has only a few different applications, we definitely stopped at like an overview. And on the side there, I'm taking notes about where we may want to dig in a little bit more granular. But I definitely think one of my main questions that I ask is like, and I think it goes back to Adam's first slide, which is why are we here? What are we looking to accomplish? You know, those types of questions. And then also like what type of data, like you said, what's the crown jewels? Like what really matters here? And we've done that. So within healthcare, particularly at a company like Permis Health, there's eligibility files, right, for being able to determine who gets services or not. That is one of the top crown jewels within the company. And I have sat down and done a threat model on just access, like who all has access to this thing, to better understand, you know, kind of some of the landscape and the threats for just that data in itself, those crown jewels.
And Tim, just as a background on that, have you have you had any interaction with the insurance companies about that? Like, a cyber insurance provider, like what do they think the crown jewels for that particular company are? Like that's
not with insurance in particular, but I mean that would be the same kind of conversation, right? Because there's
reluctant to provide you coverage for is the thing that you need to be most concerned with protecting from. Like,
so is the answer really that it's subjective and it's topical? Is that the answer?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it could be, because Corey, that's where I got a lot of compliments in the threat modeling, even outside, like I said, outside of the dev space, because even in the security engineering space, everyone's like, we're going to design it this way. But then when you start bringing different scenarios and different faults that can occur, they go, oh, well, how do we account for this?
Yeah.
So I actually see threat modeling. It's a lot of times tied to development teams and application security, but it can be applied everywhere because it is so general, and we can all.
The reason that ShowStack provides the 4 questions that he does, that his org does, is that threat modeling doesn't have to be an application security thing. It should be more than that.
So it's a methodology, not a process.
Yeah, and to your point about
it's not integrated with the development. Like this isn't going to turn into user stories. This is identify problems that you need to go and fix.
Well, and it's even a lot of it is too is like you can use this for pretty much anything. Legacy applications, you can start mapping out an application that nobody has no idea with, right? And you give.
From a maturity standpoint, most organizations aren't ready to start doing the threat model for the entire enterprise.
Yeah.
Like that's the reason that we're not doing that as a regular thing. I think in the next 10 years that might start becoming a regular thing, and there'll be tools available to us as an industry to go and have that conversation with the C-levels about like what are we going to do to figure out which things we need to focus on. Picking out what the priorities need to be for a security program at an organization is the purview of the CISO today, and a lot of that I think is secret sauce. Like it's just them doing their job, and they're either really effective at it, really lucky at it, haven't had any weaknesses exposed, or they've been moving around because things happen.
Yeah, so Corey, and this can be implemented in multiple ways. So it can be for new designs, it can be for current designs if you're trying to do discovery. I've used it for, big thing within healthcare is putting medical devices on our network. That is where threat modeling really shown. And a lot of people, if I wasn't sure about something, it's like, okay, we need to have, I retitled it data flow discussion instead of threat model, because I wanted it to be, it wasn't just for security purposes. It was like, how is the network team going to manage this? How is, the SOC going to be alerted to this? How is the administrator is going to admin this? So there's multiple. It can really show a lot of value if you start deploying this within the company. But to your question about the executive level, they kind of do some of this with business continuity and disaster recovery, right? That is to me, it's just another form at a higher level of threat modeling. And a lot of companies today are doing a lot of that stuff because, in South Carolina, I guess we're going to say a tsunami. I know it's not accurate, but I can't think of another one because we have tornadoes up here, right? Tornadoes are an actual thing
When you see
that could come through.
Looking at Tim, like, what are you talking about?
Right. Within Tennessee, for example, is tornadoes. If a tornado skips through, Nashville and takes out our data center, what do we do? So there's just a variety of different. So again, South Carolina, a tsunami comes into Columbia, South Carolina, wipes out it. Or your data centers in Charleston. There you go. Hey, you know what? Threat modeling, even if you look at threat modeling, it says even do movie Mission Impossible related threat models, right? Yes, this is very unlikely to happen. That's where Dread comes in, is it kind of level sets on what's actually going to happen or what's likely to happen versus what's going to actually happen. But yeah, exactly. A Sharknado is a good example of a threat. Comes through Columbia, South Carolina, wipes out our data center. Or we need to reboot the servers and a bunch of sharks just laying around the servers. What do we do?
After your data center, it's after your server engineers.
That too, right? Well, your sysadmins are just going to break into the building and go John McClane on people.
Hush.
You better have chainsaws in your
That's right.
server.
There you go. Hey, there's a mitigating threat, right? As Sharknado's coming, we got to have our chainsaws. Where are the chainsaws at?
All right. So tools. As we said, whiteboards, Visio, Excel, some kind of bug tracker. OWASP has Threat Dragon. You can try it out. It is under development, and over the next year, I would expect it to start doing a lot more than it's doing now. But the Microsoft Threat Modeling tool is the tool that I've found the most success with. It has everything sort of baked into one package. I'm actually going to demo that later on tonight, provided we don't talk until 9:30. I will abandon the demo if it gets too late. So, the method as far as methodologies go, I'm mainly going to talk about Stride. There's a bunch of others out there: Dread, as Tim mentioned, Pasta, Vast. Sorry, not Vost. But Stride stands for that acronym right there that I'm not going to walk you through exhaustively. But basically, if you look at a threat model, you want to walk through each of those different attack vectors as it relates to that interaction in a given diagram, right? So if I've got a user talking to a server, I want to consider how spoofing could tamper with that interaction. If I tamper with the data stream between the user and the server, what could happen? And you run through all of those different things. If you've got certain mitigating controls like TLS encryption between the user and the server, and it's an authenticated connection, that eliminates a large swath of the attack vectors that you need to consider at that point in the model. So it affects which pieces you're going to focus on throughout the process.
And I think that's maybe a key point, because that's what I was thinking in my head is, so you're going to have multiple links in that chain, right? If you're just you're
Absolutely.
talking about a user connecting to a DMZ, right? A web application, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to consider each link in the chain minus the mitigated controls in there, like you're saying. So if it's SSL encrypted, tampering is less likely.
Right. Exactly.
So you don't necessarily consider that.
I'm not going to waste a ton of time
Right.
considering how we might tamper with the connection if I know it's encrypted, and
Right.
I've got reasonable assurances that it's authenticated. Now, if one side of that connection is authenticated, So we're challenging the user in some way for a certificate or whatever, but we're not verifying that they're talking to the correct server with TLS certificates, then you've got another issue on your hands. But in most modern scenarios, it's just TLS.
And you do that for each link in the chain.
Correct.
Diagram.
Yep.
Okay.
So if it's encrypted to the edge, and as soon as you hit the web server, it's all over HTTP, well, now that means all of your internal connections could be spoofed, tampered with, manipulated. Maybe in a traditional data center, you've got reasonable assurances that that's not something you need to be concerned with. Maybe if your entire infrastructure is deployed in the cloud, that's something you should look at very closely. I have, in the past, gone through and done a threat modeling session where we talked about an application, and they're going through at the web layer, they've got all of these controls in place. We only allow this particular user agent string, we only allow this particular subset of IP addresses, and unless the MIME type matches up, we don't allow it to connect to the web application. Great, what about the API? We don't have any of those controls in place. Wonderful. And is the API openly accessible on the internet? Absolutely it is. Cool. All of those other controls you've mentioned are useless. We need to fix the API, please. So, anyway. So, let's talk about diagrams. Diagrams is the place you're going to start. A whiteboard, Visio, the threat modeling tool, whatever you're going to use. First place you're going to start is scribbling on a whiteboard, scribbling on something to start sketching out how all the pieces fit together. Utility is far more important than getting all of the details right, especially in the beginning stages. I strongly encourage you to break up the diagrams based on function. You don't want to try and cram everything into one place. It's really a cool accomplishment if you can get all of the details of a system crammed into one diagram that I have to zoom in and scroll and crawl through to see all the detail. That's not what we're looking for here. I want to be able to look at the entire system at a glance, see all the pieces and parts, and then think through the process think through a use case from a developer standpoint. If I'm a user interacting with this system, what are all the pieces my data is going to touch to make it through the system? I have found that having a component diagram that acts as sort of a reference point to copy and paste from, that literally doesn't have any connections on it, it's just all of the pieces of the constellation arrayed on an empty field, as a useful starting point. It's never right on the first diagram. Every single time I've built one, I throw all the components out, like, all right, we think we got everything? Cool, let's start. And throw it over and start building a data flow diagram. The data flow diagram is your sort of high-level intermediary that shows how all the pieces are connected together. This is not going to be it's not going to be a successful tool in a system of any complexity for talking about the way data flows through the system. You can talk about which components send data to which other components, but not have any sort of back and forth dialogue without it getting crazy complicated, and you're just going to have spaghetti on the screen. It does a good job of showing all of the interconnections with third parties and things like that to where we can connect all those dots, but it isn't going to help us break down all of the pieces and parts. The process flow diagram is much more focused on a single interaction. So if I'm going to register a new user, what are all the steps I've got to go through to make that happen? And when I'm building those diagrams, I want to get very, very granular. This user interacts with this system at the beginning, that system then interacts with that system, and I'm going to number those connections as I'm building that diagram to show how the data flows through the system. The problem is, as you're enumerating those for all of the different use cases in your application, that gets very, very tedious very quickly. I think that the component diagram is very important, and the data flow is very important from a high level standpoint. The process flow diagram, though, every time we've built one, we've gone through and found places where magic happened, right? So I'm going through the process, and the user's data makes it to this point, and then suddenly it's going to come out from another point. Magic doesn't exist. That doesn't happen in real life. What happened between here and here? Well, oh, there's this user or this worker agent over off on this server that's moving the data, or there's this vendor that picks it up off of an FTP server, and well, hold on, there's a whole third party we brought in the system now. So every time I've built one of those process flow diagrams, it's helped me find magic in the system and eliminate it. So this is an example of a component diagram. This is not a real application. I made this up. I only build one of these for every one of the systems that I'm gonna diagram. I'm sorry if it's really difficult to read. It is really difficult to read on the screen. All you need to really understand is that there's third parties up at the top of the screen. There's users, both third party and internal. Third party end users and otherwise on the left, and then all the internal system components down and to the right. At varying stratas, you kind of get a feel for this as you build a few, where each component needs to fit on the diagram before you start connecting them. I also don't feel like they're set in stone. This is literally just a template so that when I copy and paste it to build a new diagram, I've got everything all in one place. Every one of these I've ever built, though, in going through and building a data flow model, I found something that we didn't include in the original diagram, and I have to go back and add it in both places.
So what are the components of the components? Does that make sense? So I see you've got users or people who would interact, right?
Yep.
So you've got, you don't discretely list assets. So you've got database server listed, but it's not
Correct.
like SQL 0102 -9.
No, I'm not getting that level of detail here. You absolutely could. Another thing that you could do is enumerate all of the different like load balancers on the back end. Your mileage may vary. Sometimes it may make sense to break that out if you've got some sort of high availability cluster at a certain point in the chain, to split those out and talk about the interaction, because it's absolutely a vector for attack to manipulate that high availability cluster. Is there some way we can cause the cluster to malfunction to break the app? That I don't know. There's a clean answer for that other than just.
Well, I think that goes back to your point of not making an eye exam, right? Or how many layers deep do you want this thing to be? Because
Correct.
You could literally click on, like, depending on how you literally built your Visio, you could click on database server and it can literally pull up your database cluster and okay, now we're another layer.
Do you want to talk about the different tables in the database and
Right,
the worker?
right.
Yeah, like the stored procedures and all that. It may make sense to dive to that level of detail. On this example, I don't know.
Do you list out services? See, you've got like API listed, you've got FTP
Yeah,
server listed.
so I've got a couple of worker services listed on the right hand side of the screen there.
Okay.
And those worker services it's the same code. Literally the same code deployed twice. But one of them is logged in, queued into a message queue. The other is not. It's on a schedule, and every time it executes, it's going over and fetching data from an FTP server. If there's data there, it processes. If there's not, it quits. Like that level of detail is interesting to me from there's two different worker agents sitting on that server. That's two different points I can attack to manipulate it. And if I compromise one, does it compromise both? So so system design, this is all high level. This is the things, the rule of thumb I like here is the access control list. So if I want to build an access control list for what things need to talk to my FTP server, this diagram should tell me. It should tell me that I'm going to expect this Anvil API to talk in, and I'm going to expect this worker service to come over and talk to that FTP server. And I can build an access control list. This is a fantasy in IT. I can build an access control list that prevents things that talk to that FTP server that shouldn't. Another thing I would call attention to on this diagram is the boundaries of trust. So I've got the internet boundary here. Notice it doesn't follow the box because limitations of the Microsoft threat modeling tool. But I also have the corporate net boundary, so I can see where connections are. Damn it. There. I can see where connections are crossing into the corporate network and crossing back out again. And I've also got a trust boundary on the inside around the database server. Hopefully, in an ideal universe, the places where you've got data sunk long term, that's going to live in a place is a very trusted place that only talks to the handful of things it needs to talk to and isn't sitting in a DMZ somewhere. It's an ideal world.
With print services running on it, yes.
Sure. Boy can dream. And yeah, I use, and this is perhaps my own lack of specificity and being sort of inarticulate. I've got this labeled system design. It's really a data flow diagram, and this is, again, just really high level, trying to capture everything. I may use those terms interchangeably. Sorry. Process flow. So here it looks a lot like the system diagram. There should not be anything in here that is wildly out of touch. Like these two, one thing that is catching my attention now that I'm looking at this again, I have a connection from a worker service out to a customer. That doesn't show up here in my system diagram. That's a mistake. Whoops. Anyway, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably, and I'm sorry. So, process flow. The process flow, I'm going to have a numbered sequence, and as I follow this around, it's kind of difficult to follow in the diagram, but as I follow this around, it's going to show me how data moves within the system sequentially from one place to the next, to the next, to the next, until we're done with this process. I like to build processes based on use cases. The developers for a system built the system based on use cases. So that they maintain it based on a use case. So got to be able to register a user, got to be able to register, we've got to allow users to register themselves. We've got to be able to allow users to transfer their data to third parties. Whatever they are for the given system, I like to build this process flow. This allows you to ferret out all of the fine details in communication. We need extra things. This is where I said we're going to find magic. Wait, make an API call, then magically something on the back end fetches data from an FTP server? What happens here?
How do you prove that, though? I mean, how do you go through it and prove it? Once you write it out, then you're like,
so
no, you forgot this and this and this.
Sure. Yeah. I don't have a good answer for that yet. My hope long term is that we can perform tests to follow that data through the system and make sure it actually works the way we think it does. And two, I want to be able to pitch this over to pen testers. And based on this, we think the system can be attacked this way. Can you demonstrate it?
I think I've heard you mention before, the monkey wrench, take that server and turn it off and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so that's part of your business continuity disaster recovery testing.
And this is largely a conceptual exercise, and I know that feels like it's not going to provide value. I promise it is. You're going to find things where a developer is absolutely certain that it works a certain way, and a server admin goes, "There's no way, dude. That server's not there anymore."
Right. I can totally see this, and I get the value in all of this, right? It's just the little tiny things out there that just come back and bite you in the ass.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, and these conversations tend to pull out those type of things. We've had so many times where you have the people in the room and they're like, no, this like Adam just said, the server's not there anymore. So that's, but at least you're having those conversations. It's also you can't let the perfect be the enemy of good. Yeah. So I mean, you will potentially get things wrong, but that doesn't mean you don't go through these exercises. And these exercises definitely call out things that could have happened and you can avoid.
So the first two threat models you build, maybe don't even touch the process flows. Just skip straight over it and do the high-level designs, presuming that you're going to miss things like worker agents that do magic on the back end.
And the high level is where you want to start, and then you kind of figure out, okay, I want to dig into this a little bit more, and then you have another session on that.
Fantasy long term that I'm going to integrate this data and connect the dots between here and an asset inventory to where I can literally double click a thing on this diagram and it takes me over to an asset inventory record, and over time start to go identify things that are in my asset inventory as a data center asset or a infrastructure asset, whatever you want to classify them as, but that don't show up in one of these. Because if it's that important, why the hell doesn't it show up here? And if it's there and it's important, why don't I have it in my threat model?
Or what is this thing that's sitting in there and nobody knows what the hell it does?
Yeah,
because God damn it, this ain't gonna work without
correct.
it.
It's all going back to the is there a server in some closet somewhere that's critical to the operation of the company, and no one's had a key to that closet for the last 10 years.
I have a question, and this might be either ahead of the game or a really dumb question, but again, I don't go here. So, how does this,
You do now. Continue.
How does this kind of stuff, I know that, what you're showing us now is kind of like the beginning of figuring out where problems could arise, right? How do you get that from people with y'all's brains to people with not y'all's brains?
I'm so glad you asked.
Well, if I can take you back 2 slides to your system diagram.
Click.
So there are now software, there's now items that will build that map for you somewhat.
I was going to get to that at the end of the presentation, but hell, we can talk about it now.
No, go to the end of the presentation.
Yeah, no, there are tools to do automated threat modeling. I have not used them. I don't know how effective they are. I would imagine they're going to get a hell of a lot better over the next 10 years.
I was thinking like a service delivery map. So ServiceNow has what? Do you recall the one that's in Azure? I forget what it's called in Azure, but it'll show your infrastructure and it'll build the web for you where it shows the service connections.
Yeah.
So that gets you at least partway to your system design diagram.
Yeah.
So just as a jumping off point, rather than having to go through it with people, you might get started there. But anyway, that's it.
I have not heard of good automation threat modeling, and a lot of it is because there's just too many factors. And this goes back to, within application security tooling, which automates a lot of SQL injection and cross-site scripting, it does not find business logic very well. And so within threat modeling, there's a lot of business logic, because how do you account for an insider threat, which is the big topic right now, right? So
he was basically asking what components do you show in there, how detailed do you get in the system diagram?
Yeah. So
I've had this argument before.
No, I did. Computer science answer, it depends. I don't think you get to layer 2. I keep these at layer 7 most of the time. Maybe layer 2 makes sense. That just sort of depends on what threats you're considering. How are you considering attacking this, and do you feel like you need to go to that level of detail? If I think starting out, this is the kind of net where you throw it in the water. You don't have to have that tight a net. You're going to catch some fish without pulling in your routers and switches and bears oh my.
I say that I like to see them on there because I know that at that point because I'm considering visibility and control. Is what I look for, and the firewalls give me that.
Sure. The challenge I see there is that this diagram is talking about connections that get made across infrastructure. Yeah. If you flip this and tried to show this in a network diagram, this would go back to that subway, the subway map problem. Yeah, I can put all the things in one image, but it's the kind of thing, I've got a map of New York City, and I've got to zoom in to street level to see anything meaningful.
Literally just had this happen at work 2 weeks ago, where we had a process flow diagram. No, we had a system design diagram. And I started asking, well, where are the firewalls? And what about this IP address? What about this subnet? What about, and the guy, the tech was like, look, you can't put that on this diagram. And he's like, here's a different diagram. I was like, perfect, let's use that one.
So that's sort of the point of these trust boundaries on this diagram, is to capture the places, the choke points in the network, the data flow, whatever, where you've got some other enhanced security. I know that at this red corporate net boundary, I've got something. Might be a firewall, might be IPS, might be web app secure or web app firewall. Might be all of those things. Might be any combination of the two. Like,
So just follow up comment there. So maybe that's a threat model for the network layer, and I think I'd have to agree
yes,
there.
absolutely,
That's the-
yeah, 100%. You could build a network layer threat model. I've never built one. I kind of want to do it now. Maybe call me and we'll do that as a.
Well, and I was responding to Jeff. Even if the network layer can be an entry point for if you have like a web application that's externally available, right? So they're coming through this firewall. So if we have a DDoS attack, then you can mitigate it via these types of things. And if you have a WAF in place, that's another thing that you call out, etc.
I really wish Mackenzie was here to argue with me, but I'm like, yeah, but we could just send a phishing email. I could have.
I mean, I have drawn threat models for email and phishing attacks, and so it's that's certainly there, and that's certainly an aspect of it.
So let's talk about the actually reviewing the threats to keep us moving along because it's getting late. So this is taking that stride. Let me back up. The picture on the right hand side of the screen here is a snap from the threat modeling tool where it's actually in analysis mode, and it's flipped from the design mode where we're actually sketching things out to actually analyzing all of the interactions we've documented. The tool will allow you to specify like what type of connection is this? Is this HTTPS? Is it HTTP? Is it FTP? Whatever. And then that actually affects the threats that we see enumerated down at the bottom. But it's literally just walking through stride on each one of those connection points between systems, and it takes into account that it's crossing a trust boundary. The crossing of trust boundaries is a useful thing to call out places you should focus on, because that's from an attack standpoint, that's where you're going to catch someone. It's where you've got the most chance of catching an attack, right? Because we're either coming into the network and we've got presumably more logging, more tooling watching it, or we're coming onto a database server and presumably there's more controls around that. It's not open to the rest of the network. The other thing you can presume is that you've put that trust boundary there for a reason, and the things on the inside of that trust boundary are valuable, more valuable than the things on the other side of it. And I don't know why I called this out here. I must have done this presentation differently in my head. But that little diagram down there about then a miracle occurs, yeah, that doesn't happen. So
that was the beginning of the presentation.
yeah, I needed to pull that forward.
I like
Mea
it.
culpa. All right, so let's demo this thing.
I want to go back to that though. So, and Hope, this goes back to your question. So, how does this end up relating back to Hope's question, which is basically, does that provide that translation?
Yes, this is where we translate from. We've got a diagram. So, and I was gonna build a new one of these, but it's late enough in the evening. Oh, is it? Oh, it's not 7:14 p.m. My laptop's on Tennessee time.
No,
It
it's
is
not.
actually 8:15. So we're not going to build a new diagram. We're just going to run with this hypothetical diagram I built with registering a new user. So this is the threat modeling tool. We're going to switch to analysis view. And so it builds for each of the diagrams you've created a different list of threats. So we're going to focus on this new user process, and then I'm going to filter this to this first interaction here. Okay. So speaking of the employee external entity, so basically someone pretending to be that employee that shouldn't, so they've got creds that they shouldn't have. Do we have mechanisms to control that, right? So authentication would be the first thing. Let's go back to design view and see if I actually fix that.
And you choose the category and everything. You put the detail in there. It doesn't automatically generate that.
Oh no, that's the reason I love this tool. Thank you for bringing that up, because that was the place I first wanted to go and I completely forgot to. I didn't build a single one of these entries. This was all automatically generated based on the diagram that I created.
Okay.
So all I did was sketch things out and show how things are connected, and it goes and builds this list of things to deal with.
Okay.
And this is all native in Tool. You can actually export all this with a report. I won't do that because I think I have it on hand. We'll just build it because I don't want to hunt for it.
Not a real application.
That's correct. Not a real application. Hey, there it is. Dataflow demo.
Cheater.
Damn right. So this will generate an HTML report that shows you all of the threats that it's dynamically automatically identified. You can actually go in here though and like don't move my things around. I don't want to move them around. I want to talk about them. Here, hold on.
It's right over there, behind the water bottle.
Good God.
I needed that entire presentation.
I did need that
Could
the
you imagine
entire
chaos?
presentation. I really wish you'd have just let me. So I can add a user-defined threat. So this tool is very good at walking through stride on each of the pieces and identifying at that minute level like things that can go wrong. It doesn't do things like identify insider threat and like, let's say Corey's had a really bad day at work and has just decided to use his admin privileges to break the system. What could he do? That's not the kind of thing that's going to emerge out of this piece of the tool analysis. You have to add that in. The thing I like about this though is that I don't have to think through stride on every one of these pieces. That's the place where we miss things, right? We have automation because we're bad at going through complex systems with a list and pulling out all the details we need to be pulling out. This does a lot of that for us. So let's go back real quick to the design view because I don't think I bothered specifying any of the properties here. Yep, no I didn't. So let's say we're authenticating the source and we're authenticating the destination. Now this is an authenticated connection. Convert to HTTPS.
And those properties is how it did.
And that's how it determines what threats it's going to show you.
Okay, okay.
So now we go back to analysis view. I've got a different list. Now I've got cross-site scripting and elevation using impersonation. I've got a different set of threats to consider because I've provided the system with more information. So we can walk through the entire chain here if we sort by interactions and see, because like I haven't specified that that's an encrypted connection, so I've got a very short list of things to consider. As you go through the tool, you can actually specify like what the status is. This isn't applicable because I've got some security control in place. I can make a note of that. I have not yet experimented with converting this data out into a work ticket in some other system. There may be tools out there that make that magic happen. I actually want to see if I can dump all of this straight out of the tool into ServiceNow. But
Here, do this work.
That's
Dude.
evil. That's evil.
That's,
dude, it's evil, but also like if I can get to a point where my models are that good and like
Yeah.
we need to dump all this out and enumerate it or work through it.
There's a good question.
No, it is not a licensed product, totally free. Download it off the internet right now. Go use it.
Well, I mean, worst case scenario, you've got your report that you can pull out. Similar to like penetration test, you can pull out the
Yeah.
penetration test.
Another cool thing about the files here. Let me open up Visual Studio.
careful.
Oh no, Visual Studio, we've gone too far. I'm not about this. Go back.
Show me on the doll where Visual Studio touched you.
So this The actual models are all just XML files. So if you feed them into Git or whatever, it can track the changes over the life cycle of the model. So you can literally embed it alongside the source code for a given application. I'm not sure you want to from a security standpoint, because if someone compromises your source code, now they have the threat model for your application. That's maybe not a great thing.
Here's my code, here's how to break it.
Yeah.
So
Like,
encrypt the hell
it's
out
one
of
thing.
it.
Yeah, it's one thing to give them the source code. It's quite another. Here is exactly where and how to hit us.
I have that argument all the time that we don't protect our security reports nearly as much as we do as the actual systems that we're reporting about.
Yeah, and
Like, these are the
not,
secrets, guys.
Not a great look. So where to store this is totally on you, and it depends on the posture of your organization, how comfortable you are with this kind of information being out there. I'm just saying Git as a tool is very good at tracking the kinds of changes that you're going to make in this model. The other thing that I suspect, and I haven't borne out yet, is that I can interface with the XML just like this tool is doing to extract those work items out, and like ServiceNow consume this and turn that into work items. But that's an area for future research.
That's a great thing to exploit to management.
Right.
You could use this for design too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if you're going to create a new site and do whatever.
Yes. So this is actually a step that is supposed to be included in the software design lifecycle, in the design step, like where you actually get in the room with the engineers who are architecting the system and lay out the design, talk about all the use cases, and then make all the changes up front before you've actually committed any bits to platters. In a really archaic reference that probably isn't accurate today, because blah 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 cloud. Anyway, I haven't gotten there yet. I'm about to though. We're very close to actually integrating this and at the design phase before we actually start writing code. We're going to run through and build models.
You can't find controls, like you can't put a firewall, there's not like a firewall asset that you can put in and assign properties to it.
So, let's close this model.
So,
Yeah, save it, sure. I don't know what it changed.
God, that's a mood.
So you can create templates in this, and the templates actually include all of the other assets that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you for coming. Close template. There we go. So I haven't gotten into the nitty gritty on this. I want to, but this tool actually allows you to define all of the attributes and elements of a system, and
opt out.
you
Thanks, I hate it.
you can change the icons, you can change the threats associated with it. Yeah.
Deep in the weeds now.
No, thank you.
Yeah, we went from 17,000 feet to like 8 inches.
Wow.
Okay.
So it's in
Thanks.
there.
Thanks, I hate it. That's more than I needed.
You're quite welcome.
I know I asked the question and I
You-
deserve it, but I just saying.
Your
All right.
face has been slapped.
Escape? That's not what I wanted. I didn't want to start from the beginning. All right, so where's the present from here?
Bottom right.
Shut up.
Wow.
Shut up. I don't know how to use.
Drug caterer Corey is at
Yeah.
it again.
Thank you, Corey, for helping me.
Wish I did hockey for it.
All right, so time.
You're out of it.
I am out of it. That's why I skipped out of demo and came back to slides. If you've got documentation up front, I really like to take that documentation and use it to start building the threat model before I get anyone else in the room. I don't want to waste people's time. And if I can take data that's on a page and turn it into a diagram and lay out how I think it's connected, that moves us ahead of ferreting all that out of people's heads and talking about it and getting it wrong and fixing it anyway.
Yeah,
I've had
one tool that I've used in the past that looks very similar is like cloud migration planning tools, where you're like, hey, we have all this on-premise stuff, we want to go to the cloud, but we need to know where go migrate, a handful of
Right.
web interfaces to the cloud. So that could be a potential starting point if you want to.
We might have to have lunch and talk about that. Maybe at
My
Taqueria-
counter always open for lunch.
Taqueria Jalisco.
Ah, see.
So.
Oi.
Oy vey.
I appreciate what just happened, even if it's inscrutable to the outside world. So I've had these threat modeling sessions where we're building the model, take about 30 minutes, and I've also had them run over 2.5 hours, just because we keep finding details to pull out. It just depends on how complex the system is, how many pieces, moving parts there are to a given system. The analyzing threats pieces, I don't have as much data on. I think it takes a bit longer. I feel like that takes around 3 hours to move through. Maybe over the course of the next year, I'll get more experience under my belt and be able to shorthand some stuff and shorten that up. The triage piece where we're actually taking that, kicking that out, that is going to take a little longer just because you're figuring out what the business wants to expend energy fixing. Some of these things, it is a reasonable approach to risk to just accept it.
It assigns priority ratings in there, doesn't it?
It does. It does. The tool does have those priority ratings natively, and those priority ratings are out of the box. You're gonna figure that out based on how sensitive you think the content of the system is and how critical that is. Yeah.
It depends on the org though, right? I mean, it depends on the size and if they're busted apart.
Yeah.
Like what you're focusing on here, if you're worried about securing the perimeter.
Yeah.
And depending on who you're working
Are there 17 users for this application or 17,000?
Right.
Yeah.
And who you're gonna be building this for and who you're gonna be where the details need to go, right? I mean, because the overall thing, you're looking at execs there that have to come down and hand this shit out and make a decision.
So the Showstack and company tell you to allocate about an hour to 2 hours to each of those 4 pieces. I think 30 minutes to 2 hours is probably about right. The other thing that I have found with threat modeling is that it's very easy to overdose on it and to I'm going to dive in and just focus on this one application and find all the details in it. And I might just stay in that application for the rest of existence, and that could be my yellow wallpaper. And
ooh, no.
we got to pull out and at some point move on to other things. And you're trying to dig up as much as you can, as much detail as you can, with as little time as you can, as much details you can for as little time invested as possible. You're trying to maximize value here for the time you spend on it.
Only up to the medium hanging fruit.
Right.
Do you have a mental break point built in for yourself when you realize, if you feel like you've zoomed in too much and you go, oh, wait a minute?
Yeah, usually it's when I'm looking at something and I realize it's going to take the next 4 weeks to go through just building models before we even talk about threats. I'm like, all right, hold on.
Okay.
So I think a good place to start is a rough inventory of the applications you want to go through and build a high-level model for all those and all of the different use cases. So get the developers to hand off the use cases or whatever, and that gives you a punch list. And you can lay out a calendar and figure out how long it's going to take you to get through all of those, to just build basic models for all of them. And then, if you get into it and figure out that beautiful schedule you've laid out where you're going to get everything done in 6 months is now busted and it's going to take you 18 months to finish, hold on. The other piece to that, though, is maybe this is the application where it's integrating with the most third parties and it's got the most external users. Maybe that makes sense. It's kind of just a judgment call based on how I'm feeling in the moment and whether or not I feel like I'm wasting people's time. The other thing that it is possible to do is to exhaust the goodwill of the developers participating in the process by asking too many detailed questions in one session, and they're like, "Guy, do you want to just read the source code?" Because
So quick thought on how to prioritize or figure out which system you would model. If you're talking about applications, which application you would model. So you would base it on data classification and business criticality for that system. So if you've got a highly system that contains customer data, social security numbers, whatever, and it's critical to the business, it makes money, then that would probably be a system you would want to focus on versus the system that's only internally accessible and holds, like, I don't know, birthdays.
Yeah.
You might go, okay, fine. We'll worry about that one later.
Yeah, right, absolutely, yeah. So
Our HR system.
this is not an excuse to go spend time on things that don't make sense.
Right.
But that's the one that has everyone's password in it.
Go home.
You can't. I have to go.
Let's do a threat bubble.
You're not welcome. You're not welcome here anymore. All right.
I got news for you, Twitty.
Trolled too hard to take that.
Resources. So showstack.org, again, wrote the book on it, has numerous blog posts on how to get started, tools you can use. They do have a really nifty link to peel and stick whiteboards that you can literally just put on any wall. It's kind of a neat product I didn't know existed, but
oh no.
Yeah, I kind of want to.
No. Mm-mm. I'm speaking on behalf of your wife.
Oh, you know what?
You talking about the
We could vandalize this room. Just turn all the walls into whiteboard. Great.
Is it literally like dry erase whiteboard stuff?
Yes.
Oh.
Like you peel it.
I was thinking it was different.
I was thinking.
They do have paint too.
Paint.
They do have paint too. You can also get chalkboard paint.
Yeah.
Pro tips.
That's
I am working
Adam's
on.
padded room. There's just a white
Yeah.
a room with
Yes.
whiteboards.
Dude, the walls aren't padded. It's just whiteboard. There's dry erase to inhale everywhere.
I come back, the walls are covered, Adam's laying on the floor like drooling with a bunch of burned out dry erase markers.
The ceiling is
The only thing-
whatever the IT equivalent of the system.
The only thing you're leaving out of that is the bottles of Jameson and 10 cups.
No, I'm not
strewn
putting
about the
alcohol
room.
in there.
Anyway, I've got a little GitHub page going where I've got some of these links. The threat modeling playbook up there, link up there. The Microsoft threat modeling tool is at that link. You can download that for free. There's all kinds of documentation on how to use it, how to get in there and build your own templates. You can do a ton with that. That is a deep rabbit hole. I'm going to get into that someday, maybe. And OWASP Threat Dragon is out there, threatdragon.com. That tool is really close to being useful. But
What does it do? I don't know because you mentioned it. But,
here, let me just.
or did I miss that part?
No, so the Threat Dragon does the same thing as the Microsoft tool.
And super quick because we're at combat. If it is too much detail, I can look at it online.
No, it's fine.
He said for another one.
Log in with local session? Yeah, okay. Explore sample. Okay. Demo throw. There we go. So it allows you to do the same thing.
It doesn't look nearly as rigid. I don't like it as much.
Yeah, it's not as rigid. The other thing is to
I see
get
curves. I don't like it.
well, but to get at your threats, you have to come in here and enumerate them this way.
Interesting.
Did you just bend that line?
I did, and that's
no.
yeah. There
Corey's
are
like, I'm out.
there are user comfort things I don't like about it as much. However, it does have a lot of the same tools where you can enumerate threats. The thing that I haven't seen is that it doesn't give me a spreadsheet view. And that's the thing that I desire in my heart of hearts, is a way to just manage everything in spreadsheets.
It's all about the spreadsheet.
All right, listen. We gotta talk about this.
Listen, I spent too much time as a.
I wanna fucking fight Excel like all the time.
I do too.
That's fair.
It's in a different way though.
That's what
Yeah.
It's much dirty.
Yeah.
He's just into it and I'm not.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's all.
Questions? Any other reason to interject? Okay, cool.
How the hell do you sell it? Seriously.
And like get people around the table.
I mean, just like, you go through all this work, you put everything together, you figure out where all the vulnerabilities are, what needs to be fixed, and then you try to sell it to a bunch
Why are
of
you standing up?
execs that don't have a clue.
So the executive buy-in is tough. I don't know how to have a solid answer there. I will say.
Do you know what you need?
I have a cheeky
Business
answer.
analysts. Sorry, continue.
And you gotta dumb it down though, right? I mean, it's like, look, this is gonna hurt you financially here.
That's the real thing. If you can go through here and find a threat, because an auditor is a threat at the end of the day, right? Like, if I'm not using the encryption I'm supposed to use, and an auditor finds that can turn into real money that's out the door.
Dumb it down.
So
Outside of this being a business continuity or disaster recovery thing, this is not an executive tool. This is an engineering at the technical level. Let's do things the right way, and let's make the exec happy, because
What my question was about, like, is there someone that like translates it to?
But you still have to justify the cost of doing this, so it's
Yes.
gotta
The
go
threat
to
model.
the exec.
well, so again, if you want to, if you're going to justify doing it to the executives, it's like,
For lulz.
so to dive into your answer a little bit. So the way that we justified a DLP platform